When we think about a meaningful relationship, we so often are talking about that feeling of being able to rely on somebody, of being able to trust them that they will be there when we need them. The feeling of knowing that we can count on somebody. And that comes from what I call one of the 3 requirements of relationships: consistency. And so consistency is one of the 3 requirements, also comprised of vulnerability and positivity, which I've done previous episodes on those 2 in conjunction with Enneagram. But today I'm going to focus on the Enneagram and consistency. And so consistency is the aspect of our relationship that it's the time together, the interaction, the history that we build, the way that our pattern the way we are together. And so this is what ends up helping us to feel like we can predict each other, that we know what we can count on and what we can assume you will do, because we have this pattern of having done that and put in those hours together before. This is the way that we make memories, and we kind of build up this reservoir of our time together. And every relationship requires time. We can't have positive, good feelings and share our lives and have vulnerability without that consistency, without actually having that time together. And so this one's so foundational. And there's many different barriers to it. We all live incredibly busy lives, and we all live in a world that is not naturally bringing us together with all of our friends on a consistent basis. And so for all of us, we're always inquiring, how can I practice more consistency? But I'm doing kind of a fun series right now on using the Enneagram as a lens for looking at how each one of us might increase our consistency in our relationships. I say might 1,000 times because this is just one system that kind of reminds us that we are all motivated differently, and we do tend to kind of group together with people in a type. They can look at it and say that these people have certain things in common with each other. And so I've been studying Enneagram for about 10 years, and I'm just using this as one way of us inquiring how we might practice showing consistency better in our relationships based on our type. And it's valuable, in my opinion, to watch all the other types, because it reminds us that our friends are wired differently and motivated differently and might have different challenges than we. It's very easy to judge and think, I do this, why don't they do that? And it's a good reminder that what comes naturally to us does not come naturally to everybody else. And so I'm going to go through the 9 types and pull out one way that I think might be an invitation for each of us, depending on our type, to practice more consistency, and why that might be challenging for our various types. If it doesn't resonate with you, don't even worry about it. Just ask yourself, what actually is one of the barriers to me being consistent, and go there. Let this just be something that provokes your awareness. By no means needs to limit any of us. So if we start with our Enneagram type 1, they're often called reformers or perfectionists, and they can always see something that needs to be fixed or cleaned or improved or reformed. And so they always have a to-do list, and they always have more to do. And often, not all the time, but often for ones, sitting and connecting and talking or going and spending time with other people might feel frivolous. It might feel like it's a waste of time, and that you need to be more industrious and you need to be changing the world. And so one of the invitations for some ones is to inquire, how do I give so much consistency to this cause, or to keeping this house clean, or to this change and giving voice to this, or perfecting this? And how can I channel some of that energy, that consistency, for my relationships? And the invitation is to see that as not as a waste at all, but probably one of the most important areas you can give your life to, and to pay attention to, and to be consistent in. So there's an inquiry there around whether that is wasted time, or whether that is probably the most perfect use of time, and how you can be more consistent in valuing those relationships. Our Enneagram 2s are helpers and are givers, and they are out there changing the world and doing all kinds of things for all kinds of people. And consistency for 2s is one of the biggest areas of complications in their relationships often, is that they're giving to too many different people. They have too many relationships they're managing or worrying about or paying attention to or evaluating or trying to figure out what they need to be doing in. And so one of the invitations is to prioritize, to actually limit. I know that sounds so scary, because In the case of a 2, your identity often comes from wanting to be needed by all of these people. And so if you don't show up and give to them, you worry of what they'll think of you. And the invitation there here is to worry a little less about what they're thinking of you and how you're being perceived as Superwoman or Superman, and more just saying, I need close friends. I need a few people that I can be needy with. What would it look like for me to prioritize a few people and try to build relationships that are reciprocal with a few people, rather than trying to spread myself thin and give everybody a little piece, leaving me depleted at the end and potentially not everybody else really fulfilled either. Our 3s can be so focused on achievement because they want to be admired and liked in the back end. And success is so important to them that often 3s sacrifice relationships in order to continue to push their careers forward or their work forward or whatever it is they think is the success that matters to them. And so relationships often, unless they're seen as relationships that will benefit that purpose, relationships often aren't valued for simply being a safe place for 3s to practice their vulnerability and to really be a part of integrating their lives and making their lives more whole. The invitation to 3s is to redefine success, to include your relationships, and to see, to really look at your life and to say, am I devoting the time to actually achieving my definition of success? I can't just say I want to be somebody who has friends. Am I doing what it takes to have those friends? And am I just doing it in order for everyone to think I have friends? There's really some inquiry that would be really valuable for 3s to look at under all of those layers, to make sure that they're building relationships for their sake and showing up in those relationships honestly and valuing that time as much as or more than the career success that we often have been told is so important. Our sweet 4s are often called the individualists, and they can often be more of a withdrawn type of personality. So consistency can be very challenging for 4s who often want to be pursued. They often don't want to be the ones initiating. They often want people to come to them. And so that's a really tricky thing. I interact with a lot of you in relationships and hear often of how hurt other types are to be the ones doing the initiating. And I hope that one thing that's happening as we're going through all of these different 9 types is realizing that some personalities are going to just be better at initiating than others, in initiating different things, right? So we all do that in different ways. But hopefully we're seeing that just because we're good at it doesn't mean that that's a fair expectation to place on everybody. And 4s, most of all, this is not their thing. So the invitation to a 4 is to realize how important that initiating is to your friends and to try to do what you can to set up a relationship of consistency. One, kind of hack a little bit is to say to a friend, hey, can we schedule a weekly or a monthly thing that just kind of is in the books? Because 4s love the relationship, and that way they don't have to be initiating and we don't have to worry about who's inviting who. It just is kind of happening and they can step into it. But realizing that reaching out and surprising a friend with a phone call matters so much, and that's an important thing to practice. But I would say even more than that, because that's kind of like trying to say be different than you're wired, but I would say even more than that is communicating to your friends that this is just not an area that you are practiced at, that you will be attentive to it and that you want to try. I don't think it's fair to use that as an excuse, but I certainly think it's a beautiful thing to say to your friends, like, I love that you do this for our relationship because I love the time I spend with you. And I want to be somebody who's better at initiating, but I'm telling you what, like, I just tend to pull away and withdraw, and it takes so much for me to want to come out and risk inconveniencing you or, whatever. I think it's really important that like, an act of vulnerability for you would be to communicate that so that your friends don't take it personally, and so that you can figure out, you still have to have consistency. So we've got to figure that out between you and your friends. We've got to figure out how to get that consistency in. So showing up with that honesty, if that's the case for you, and certainly practicing it as to the best of your ability, or coming up with kind of life hacks that help make that consistency happen for you. Our type 5s are investigators, and they have limited energy when it comes to relationships, and they are expending so much energy in their heads thinking of all kinds of brilliant things, but when it comes to reaching out, they can feel much more like a withdrawn type, a little bit like 4s in that way. And so one of the most important things that a 5 can do in relationship is prioritize a few, because you have limited energy, but prioritize, like name the 2 people, 3 people that you're going to say, in these relationships, I'm going to show up. I'm going to take my limited energy and invest in these people. And that means showing up in consistency. Part of consistency is not just the time, it's actually being present, getting out of your head and being available during that time that you're there. But it's also allowing them to rely on you, which is, you value autonomy and independence so much, and it's a beautiful thing. And relationships are interdependent. This is what we're here for. So allowing people to need you, and allowing yourself to rely on other people is such a beautiful practice and an inquiry. And I know that just doesn't, none of this is just like, just do the opposite. It's not to change you, but it's to be aware of where there might be some hesitation, or where there might be a block in some of your relationships that you can at least be attentive to and practice building that muscle a little bit more. Our 6 is our loyalists, and one of the areas of consistency that might be most challenging for them is trusting people. Consistency is one of the things that builds trust. I mean, that is the more time we put in. Consistency isn't just time, though. It's also, as we put in that time, we begin to feel like we understand who each other is in that time. So it's really consistent behavior as well. And 6s love that consistent behavior. We all do. We all need it. Nobody wants to feel like we're walking on eggshells around. We're not worried about other people and how they're going to respond. We want to believe we can kind of predict, and 6s most of all. And the fear of being betrayed, or of not being worthy of the trust of a 6 is ever present in their mind. And so I think the invitation to a 6, when I think of consistency, is realizing that consistency or / trust isn't all or nothing. There's like a spectrum on the triangle there. At the bottom is low consistency, very little trust. Trust should just be in that moment. Like if we're agreeing to meet at a restaurant, I trust that they will show up. I trust that they won't be looking at their phone. I trust that they will be make eye contact with me. I mean, there's things we expect is a better word maybe, but it should be only within that moment and that agreeable thing, right? That moment that we've both committed to being in. And as we increase our relationship and move up the triangle, so should our commitment, our ability to trust each other move up the triangle. And so when somebody does something that disappoints us, to realize that it's not like, it's not just like, are they trustworthy or not? It's not all or nothing. It's that there's levels, and there's a spectrum, and somebody can move up and they can move down a little notch while you're a little scared. And then if they disappoint you and you're checking it out and you're talking it through, and they can move back up, and there's like a spectrum here, and that very few things that somebody does should just make them off the triangle. Like, you don't have to worry. I think the invitation here is to recognize that trust is something that somebody can be trustworthy and still disappoint you. And that doesn't mean that they're not trustworthy or that they're betraying you. It simply is a reminder that there's a scale, and that the more history you have with somebody, the more you can expect them to do, and the more you can trust them to do, but the more they'll also disappoint you and not always live up to expectations. And so an inquiry is like sitting with maybe and journaling a little bit about trust, and are they really breaking that trust, and what things just move somebody off your triangle, and are most things just simply recognizing that everybody's trustworthy in certain things, and that even if you don't trust somebody with your secrets, can you trust them to be fun in a room full of people? Can you trust them to be kind? Can you trust them to watch your kids? You know, there's a whole range of things. And so even if we don't trust people with something, we usually can trust them with 90 other things. And so looking at our relationship to trust with consistency, I think would be a beautiful place for 6s to dive a little deeper. Okay, our 7s, they're always up for fun and always want to be doing activities. So when it comes to consistency, one of the complaints that happens around 7s often is that they keep all their options open. They're doing it because they just want to wait for the most fun option and see what they feel like they want to do. But for those of us who are friends, it can often feel like we're not being chosen, or that the activity is more important than our presence. And so one of the important things things for a 7 is to look at, what does follow through mean? If I'm going to be consistent, who are a few people that no matter the activity, I prioritize the person over the fun? And we can make our own fun, but it's like, I'm not going to go choose the most fun activity if it means not being with this person. And so learning how to trust that you can bring fun and have happiness, and it might look a little different. It may not mean the favorite, most exciting option on the table, but that there's something deeper, there's something more meaningful. And consistency in this place means really showing up and building something really much more deeper, more meaningful, more happy producing, and ultimately more fun and safe for you if you can choose a few people that you are willing to prioritize in those cases. And we're not asking you to give up all the activities and all the other fun things, but who are the people that are worth you doing that, focusing on them more than the best option out there? Our 8s are our challengers, and they have potentially more energy than anybody else on the Enneagram chart. They can just give everything, and they do. And they are intense, and they're in it, and are frequently then therefore disappointed by so many of the rest of us who aren't living up to the same level of production and bluntness and intensity. And we don't thrive on stress, the rest of us, as the way an 8 does. And so an 8, it's really important to realize with consistency that how you're showing up, somebody else's will look different. And so kind of just being mindful of that and recognizing that. I think another area for an 8 that pops into my head is similar to 6s, the fear of betrayal can be kind of present there. And I think it taps into what I was just speaking of earlier a little bit. My inquiry for you would be, is it fear of betrayal? Like when you think about who you feel betrayed by, I would predict that it's usually a betrayal of your expectations of that person rather than that person betraying you. So I was talking about a 6 is kind of looking at what trust actually means, and is it all or nothing? And in a similar fashion for 8s, it's looking at recognizing that just because somebody didn't live up to your expectations, and often unspoken expectations, they didn't perform, and they didn't have this much energy, they didn't do what you would have done, they didn't show up in the way you would have shown up, and really looking at, did that person just make a mistake? Are they just not have as much energy? Are they just simply wired differently? And that's not them betraying you. That's simply them not living up to what you want them to live up to. And I think there's a really big difference there. So I would look back at some of the places where you have felt betrayed, and maybe have somebody else who helps you kind of look at those differently and just say, are those people who just made mistakes or who lived differently, chose different things, and that doesn't make them bad and it doesn't mean they betrayed you. There's an invitation there too, maybe to state your expectations a little bit more. And not that everyone can live up to that all the time, but really, if you're wanting to build consistency, it's finding a few relationships where you can have that honesty with, where they can say, yes, I can do that, or no, I can't, and there can be some honest negotiation for you, where you feel clear that you can trust the expectations and their actions with that. So yeah, a lot there. I think there's something there for you to kind of look at, though, potentially around what it looks like for your energy versus everybody else's energy when it comes to consistency. And then come our sweet, adaptable 9s, our peacemakers. And I think that one of the areas that would be of most importance to the 9s when it comes to consistency is remembering that consistency is not just putting in the time, but it's also consistent behavior. And it's what builds trust. And consistent behavior means letting the people around you know your preferences and your opinions and your feelings and your responses to things. We want to trust you. We want to know that if something's bothering you, that you'll tell us. We want to believe that if there's a preference you have, that you would name it. And so one of the ways that consistency, trust can get broken down with a 9 is if the people around them start worrying that we don't really know what they want, or they're not really naming what they're feeling. And so you're doing that lovingly to try to keep the peace, but that might be affecting how consistent people can rely on you and trust you to actually be showing up and giving who you are, because that's what they want. They want your opinion. They want to feel like they're experiencing you and know how to know what restaurant you want to go to or whatever. But consistency in this case might be a little less about even putting in the time, because you're pretty agreeable and you'll probably show up. But it might have more to just do with having the courage to be present, to be seen, to be heard, and to be consistently practicing verbalizing who you are. So as we've looked through all these 9 different types, I hope that one of them resonated with you. Maybe a couple of them did. Maybe a few of them felt familiar to you. And maybe they were just the threads that you were able to start kind of pulling on, like, well, it's not quite that for me, but where I think I would be, could improve my consistency would be. And that's really the point of this. The point of this in any personal growth stuff, any assessment, isn't to say this is who you are. It's to say this might be a tendency for you that you want to look at, because there's an opportunity there that if you can really see yourself, you can say, oh, that's where I might be getting in my way. That might be a defense barrier that I'm putting up in relationships. That might be what's motivating that fear. That might be what's pushing me forward. And so here in this place, what we're trying to say in consistency is, how can I show up to have my relationships rely on me more? And that means being able to rely on my time, being able to rely on me actually being present when I'm there, being reliable in how I'm behaving, that they're not scared that I'm gonna get all crazy and angry one time or withdrawn another time. And we all have different moods, and we all have different temptations to kind of pull away or to lean in and to get assertive. And the invitation for all of us is to just look at, how can I practice a more emotional regulation? Not trying to limit anyone, but just trying to say, people around me want to know that they can rely on me. And so how can I best practice that?